No air conditioning program could be complete without the discussion of some international residential code. Okay, in this video, we're going to be talking about International Residential Code Chapter 12 and 13. This is an overview of the highlights of the chapter. Okay, it is actually based on 2016 code right now, which is in the states that we do business in. If you are in another state, make sure you verify this based on your current code. Okay, and also if there's any code amendments. For example, in Florida there's some additional code amendments. I think Massachusetts has some. Connecticut uses base code, but always check and make sure there's not code additions for the state you're working in. I will highlight some of the code additions that I know about in some of these states as I go through this video. Okay, basically we're going to be talking about section 1201. It's under the general. Every section starts with a scope. So the provisions of chapter 12 through 24 shall regulate the design, installation, maintenance, alteration, and inspection of the mechanical systems that are permanently installed and used to control the environmental conditions within the buildings. These chapters shall also regulate those mechanical systems, system components, equipment, and appliances specifically addressed in these codes. Okay, so International Residential Code has a mechanical section. This is basically chapters 12 through 24. In addition, the general administration requirements of chapter 1 shall apply to the mechanical requirements of chapter 12 through 24. So whenever you're looking at codes, make sure you know what's in the reference chapters, because even if it's not outlined in chapter 13 through 24 or 12 through 24, make sure that you know what's in chapter 1. Everything here is added to chapter 1. Okay, section 1202 talks about existing mechanical systems. So additions and alterations or repairs is what we're specifically talking about. Additions, alterations, renovations, or repairs to a mechanical system shall conform to the requirements for new mechanical systems without requiring the existing mechanical system to comply with all the requirements of this code. Additions, alterations, or repairs shall not cause an existing mechanical system to become unsafe, hazardous, or overloaded. Minor additions, alterations, or repairs to existing mechanical systems shall meet the provisions for new construction unless the work is done in the same manner or arrangement as it was in the existing system. It is not hazardous and is approved. In other words, if you're making additions, alterations, or repairs to a system, okay, you need to conform to the requirements of the new systems. However, if it's in place, okay, if you're not making any changes, you're fine. But if you're making changes, for example, changing out ductwork, changing out an entire system, you have to comply with new codes. Okay, existing installations is addressed, except as otherwise provided for in this code. A provision in this code shall not require removal, alteration, abandonment, nor prevent the continued use of maintenance of an existing mechanical system lawfully in existence at the time of adoption of this code. Basically, what it's saying is there's no code requirement to replace an existing system if it is still working properly and safely. Okay, so mechanical contractors, air conditioning contractors cannot say to a customer, oh, your system's working fine, but we are required to remove it and replace it under the new code. There is no such requirement. Mechanical systems, both existing and new, and parts thereof shall be maintained in a proper operating condition in accordance with the original design and as a safe and sanitary condition. Devices or safeguards that are required by this code shall be maintained in compliance with the code edition under which it was installed. So let's say we're installing something under the 2016 mechanical code in the state where it's approved. Okay, the state in a couple years updates to the 2018 code, or so on and so forth. You do not have to update that system to the current code. You have to maintain it under the code edition which it was installed. The owner or the owner's designated agent is responsible for maintenance of this system. To determine compliance with this provision, the building official shall have the authority to require a mechanical system to be re-inspected. In other words, if a building official suspects that there's an unsafe application, the building official has the right to re-inspect that system. Chapter 13, okay, talks about the installation of mechanical systems, not specifically covered in the other chapters. Okay, installations of mechanical systems and equipment and systems not addressed in this code shall comply with the application provisions of International Mechanical Code and International Fuel Gas Code. So again, the International Residential Code is here referencing two other codes, International Mechanical Code, IMC, and International Fuel Gas Code. Make sure you review those codes because they do apply. Flood-resistant installations is covered in flood hazard areas as established by Table 301.2. Mechanical appliances, equipment, and installations should be located in accordance with Section 322.16, okay, and 1301.2 identification. Each length of pipe or tubing and each pipe fitting utilized in a mechanical system should bear the identification of the manufacturer. In other words, the manufacturer's information must be left on piping and tubing in some location. You can't erase it all. Okay. You also have to make sure that areas where it's possible for flood hazards to occur, for example, in a basement, the equipment should be installed above flood level. And notice the furnace in the pictures on blocks. Things need to be protected from floods. All materials used shall be installed in strict accordance with the standards under which the materials are accepted and approved. In the absence of such installation procedures, the manufacturer's instructions shall be followed. Where the requirements of reference standard or manufacturer's instruction do not conform to minimum provisions in this code, the provisions of this code shall apply. Okay, what this is basically saying is that you get manufacturer installation instructions and you have this code. Whichever one has the stricter standards, okay, is the one you're going to follow. If it's not referenced in the code, you're going to follow the manufacturer's installation procedures. If it's referenced in the code, but the manufacturer's installation procedures are stricter, you're going to follow the manufacturer's installation. If the manufacturer's installation do not meet the minimum of this code, you're going to follow the code. Okay. So plastic pipes and fittings and components is section 1301.4. Plastic pipe fittings and components shall be third-party certified as conforming to NSF 14. Okay, again, we're referencing another code, but most often you don't have to worry about this unless you're purchasing fittings from overseas. Okay, if you're bulk purchasing fittings from China or another country, okay, you have to be worried about, is it certified? The reason for this is we want to make sure there's no leaks. Third-party testing and certification, piping, tubing, and fittings shall comply with the applicable reference standards, specifications, and performance criteria of this code, and shall be identified in accordance with section 1301.2. So what did 1301.2 tell us? Okay, basically it told us that identification, every length of piping has to be identified. Okay, so it's back referencing prior sections of the code. 1302.1 approval. Appliances regulated by this code shall be listed and labeled for the application in which they are installed and used unless otherwise approved in accordance with section 104.11. Labeling on information: a permanent factory applied nameplate shall be affixed to the appliances on which appear in legible lettering the manufacturer's name or trademark, the model number, a serial number, and the seal or mark of the testing agency. A label shall also include the following: electrical appliances should include the electrical rating in volts, amps, and motor phase. Should have the identification of individual electrical components in volts, amperes, or watts, motor phase, and in BTU output and required clearances. For absorption units, it should have the hourly rating in BTUs per hour, watts, minimum hourly ratings for units having step or automatic modulated controls, type of fuel, type of refrigerant, cooling capacity in BTUs per hour, and required clearances. Fuel burning units should always have the hourly rating in BTUs per hour, types of fuel approved for use with the appliances, and required clearances. Electric comfort heating appliances, the electrical rating in volts, amps, and phase, BTU output rating, individual marking for each electrical component in amps, watts, volts, and phase, and required clearances. Everything should have maintenance instructions, regular maintenance actions, or title of a publication number for the operation and maintenance manual for that model or type of product. Okay, in other words, the data plate is required to be on the appliances. You cannot remove the data plates. It's against code. 1304 determines the type of fuel that's allowed. Fuel-fired appliances should be designed for the use of the type of fuel which they'll be connected to at the altitude where they're applied. Appliances that compromise parts of the building, mechanical systems, shall not be converted to use a different type of fuel except where approved and converted in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. The fuel input rate shall not be increased or be decreased beyond the limit rating for the altitude at which the appliance is installed. In other words, if you purchase a natural gas furnace and want to install it in a propane application, you have to convert it in accordance with the manufacturer's directions, or the other way around as well. You also cannot install an extremely large appliance and decrease the amount of fuel to it to try to get it to work in the application you're installed. Okay, you have to follow manufacturer guidelines. There's a section 1305 that talks about appliance access. This is pretty important from a service standpoint. You have to have appliance access for inspection, service, repair, and replacement. Appliances shall be accessible for inspection, service, repair, or replacement without removing permanent construction, other appliances, or any other piping or ducts not connected to the appliance being inspected, serviced, repaired, or replaced. A level working space at least 30 inches deep, 30 inches wide, shall be provided in front of the control side to service an appliance. Installation of room heaters shall be permitted without the 18-inch working space. A platform shall not be required for room heaters. Okay, comes down to it, you have to be able to work in front of an appliance panel. Okay, especially the control side. Okay, you have to have room to work. Okay. Boilers have to have room all the way around. Now, this boiler has a few other problems, okay, but it has enough clearance around it so you can work on all sides of the appliance. Furnaces and air handlers within compartments and alcoves shall have a minimum working clearance of 3 inches along the sides, back, and top within the total width of the enclosed space, being at least 12 inches wider than the furnace or air handler. Furnaces having a firebox open to the atmosphere has to have at least a 6-inch working space along the front of the combustion chamber side. Combustion air openings at the rear or side of the compartment shall comply with the requirements in Chapter 17. So again, you're being referenced another chapter, but the bottom line is we have to have space around the equipment. Okay, now there is an exception. This section shall not apply to replacement appliances installed in existing compartments and alcoves where the working space clearance are in accordance with the equipment or appliance manufacturer installation instructions. In other words, if you're replacing an existing furnace in a closet or alcove, if the manufacturer says you only have to have a 1-inch clearance and that's all that's available, it can go with the manufacturer installation instructions. Appliances in rooms is covered under 1305 1.2. Appliances installed in compartments, alcoves, basement, or similar space shall be accessed by an opening or door with an unobstructed passageway measuring at not less than 24 inches wide and large enough to allow removal of the largest appliance in the space, provided there's a level service space of not less than 30 inches deep and the height of the appliance, but not less than 30 inches at the front service side of the appliance with the door open. In other words, you've got to be able to get in there to service the equipment, and you have to be able to remove the equipment. Appliances in attics. Attics containing appliance shall be provided with an opening and a clear unobstructed passageway large enough to allow removal of the largest appliance, but no less than 30 inches high and 22 inches wide and not more than 20 feet long, measured along the center line of the passageway from the opening to the appliance. The passageway has to have a continuous solid flooring in accordance with Chapter 5, not less than 24 inches wide. A level service space at least 30 inches deep and 30 inches wide shall be present along all sides of the appliance where access is required. The clear access opening dimensions shall be a minimum of 20 inches by 30 inches and large enough to allow removal of the largest appliance. Okay? In other words, you don't have to crawl across installation and beams and open floor areas and take the chance of kicking out a ceiling to get to an attic appliance. There has to be space and a floor for you to walk to that appliance. This is an example of an attic air handler. Now, there's a few other issues here we need to take into account. Remember the conversation about what the manufacturer recommends. Okay, this is actually an illegal installation. Why? Because of the condensate line. Okay, these condensate lines, all the manufacturers now are requiring a trap in the condensate lines within 12 inches of the unit. I don't see a trap here. The other issue is if this is installed in the northeastern part of the country or areas where attics freeze, you cannot use a condensing furnace, which this is because of the 2 PVC lines. You cannot use a condensing furnace in an attic without heat tape on that condensate line because the water in it will freeze. Again, manufacturer's instructions trump code. There's some exceptions to this rule on passageway and service areas. The passageway and level service space are not required where an appliance can be serviced and removed through the required opening. In other words, if you can stand on a ladder and service the equipment through the opening to the attic, you don't have to have the level service space put in. Where the other way is where the passage is unobstructed and not less than 6 feet high and 22 inches wide for the entire length. Okay, in other words, if you can walk across an attic with a 6 feet height, okay, 22-inch width for the entire passageway, and it's not more than 50 feet long to the equipment, you don't have to have the solid level floor. There's a section 1305 1.4 which talks about appliances underfloor. In other words, crawl spaces. Underfloor spaces containing appliances shall be provided with an unobstructed passageway large enough to remove the largest appliance, but no less than 30 inches high, 22 inches wide, and no more than 20 feet long measured along the center line of the passageway from the opening to the appliance. A level service space of at least 30 inches deep, 30 inches wide shall be present at the front or service side of the appliance. If the depth of the passageway or the service space extends 12 inches below the adjoining grade, the walls of the passageway should be lined with concrete or masonry extending 4 inches above the adjoining grade in accordance with Chapter 4. The rough framed access opening dimensions shall be a minimum of 22 by 30 inches and large enough to remove the largest appliance. Okay, first of all, what it's saying is you can't have dirt walls on a crawl space that's under grade. Okay, it has to be protected from cave-in, it has to be protected from water entry, okay, and it has to be able to be safe for you to work in. Okay, crawl space entrances. There are a few exceptions again. A passageway is not required where the level service space is present when the access is opened and the appliance can be serviced and removed through the required opening. In other words, if I open the access to the crawl space and could service it right there, a passageway is not required. Where the other way is when the passageway is obstructed and not less than 6 feet high and 22 inches wide for its entire length. Okay, the passageway should be not limited in length. In other words, if I go into a crawl space and I can stand in it with a 6 feet high and 22 inches wide and it's not obstructed, I do not have to have a solid floor to walk on. Equipment ground clearances are important. Equipment and appliances supported from the ground shall be level and firmly supported on a concrete slab or other approved material and extend not less than 3 inches above the adjoining ground. Such support should be in accordance with the manufacturer's installation instructions. Appliances suspended from the floor should have a clearance of not less than 6 inches from the ground. Okay, in other words, if I'm in a crawl space and the equipment is on the ground, the concrete slab or other approved material has to be 3 inches above the ground. This is to allow for water. Okay, if it's suspended from the floor above, you can't have it closer to 6 inches from the ground. Excavation for appliance installations shall extend to a depth of 6 inches below the appliance, have 12 inches on all sides, and except the control side, which should have a clearance of 30 inches. There are some electrical requirements for crawl spaces as well. A luminaire, a light bulb, controlled by a switch located at the passageway opening, and a receptacle outlet near the equipment has to be installed. And it's referencing Chapter 39. But you have to have a light down there, and you have to have an outlet where you can plug equipment into near the equipment. Okay. Section 1306 is pretty important because it talks about clearances from combustible spaces, okay, or combustible construction. In other words, how close can you mount equipment to something that can burn? Okay. Appliance clearances is addressed in Section 1. Appliance shall be installed with the clearances from unprotected combustible material as indicated on the appliance label and in the manufacturer's installation instruction. So when we talk about, for example, piping, vent piping, okay, you have different clearances based on the material. You see on this side we have A. This is the combustible material, and here we have, okay, A, and we have B, and we have C. They give you diagrams in the code. So A equals the required clearance with no protection. B equals the reduced clearance permitted in table 1306.2 with protection. Okay, in other words, combustion shields or something like that. Thirteen 1306.2 reduction of clearances shall be in accordance with the appliance manufacturer instructions and table 1306.2. Forms are protected with ventilated air spaces shall conform to the following requirements. They're not less than 1 inch of airspace between the protection and the combustible wall surface. In other words, Whatever you're using for heat shields cannot be closer than 1 inch between the protection and the combustible wall. That's for fire prevention. Air circulation shall be provided by having edges of the wall protection open by at least 1 inch. If the wall protection is mounted on a single flat wall away from the corners, air circulation shall be provided by having the bottom and top edges or side and top edges open at least 1 inch. What that allows is the natural circulation of air coming in from the sides and out the top. Wall protection covering 2 walls in a corner shall be open at the bottom and top edges by at least 1 inch. In other words, you can't cover an entire wall with sheet metal or some other non-combustible, call it a combustion protection, and not leave space at the bottom and the top, because what's going to happen is that air is going to heat up behind the protection and possibly cause a fire. Okay, there's figures in here. Table 13.6.2 shall not be used to reduce the clearance for solid fuel appliances listed for installation with minimum clearances of 12 inches or less. For appliances listed for installation with minimum clearances greater than 12 inches, the table should not be used to reduce the clearance to less than 12 inches. In other words, if it's a solid fuel appliance, wood burning stove, pellet stove, coal stove, solid fuel, fireplace, you cannot reduce the clearance to less than 12 inches. And again, this is an overview of the code, chapter 12 and 13. This is not a full view of the code. You really should be, when you're installing appliances, take the time to go through the code book. If it's not in the code book, look in the manufacturer's installation instructions, which you should be doing anyways. And if it's not there, you know what? A call to the local building office solves most problems. They'd rather you ask in advance than ask afterwards.